Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Propcast. My name is Louisa Dickens, co-founder of Ella Mulry and board director of the UKPA, and I shall be your weekly host. Each week for 30 minutes, we'll be connecting the VCs, prop tech startups, and real estate professionals globally, and assist in bridging that famous communication gap we all love talking about. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Propcast. Today is a family affair, and we are lucky enough to be joined by both Brad and Jake Dockster from GreenGen, and we will be talking about the built environment for innovation and solutions. So welcome to the show, Brad and Jake.
Louisa, very nice to be here. Thanks for having us.
Thank you for having us. Happy to be here.
For those who are listening, GreenGen is an award-winning company that operates at the intersection of energy, real estate, technology, and capital markets. Their client-driven focus delivers financial outcomes while driving sustainability, making the world a better place. GreenGen operates in 5 integrated platforms, so that is solutions, ventures, analytics, trading, and property. Their headquarters are in Washington, DC, and regional offices in London, Tokyo, and Shanghai. Now, Brad is the Chief Executive Officer, as well as being the co-founder of GreenGen, and has had an interesting and extremely global journey to get to the place where he is today. Now, during his time, and I think more than sort of 2 decades of real estate investing, Brad was a principal with national real estate investment firm McFarlane Partners, overseeing activities of their Mid-Atlantic business, and founder and managing director for Starwood Capital Europe, overseeing operations, direct investments, and operating JVs and financing activities throughout Europe. Now, he earlier founded Starwood Capital Asia and was responsible for the firm's Asian operations. But before all of that, Brad began his career with JMB Realty, then the largest real estate firm in the United States, and later with CRI Inc., the nation's largest owner of multifamily residential properties at the time. And also for all our UK listeners, Brad has also lived and worked in lovely Bristol, which we'll hear a little bit more about later. And now for Jake's introduction. Jake is the Vice President Ventures of GreenGen, where he is primarily responsible for identifying and investing in property-related technologies that lower operating costs in the built environment. And prior to GreenGen, Jake spent over 2 years working in the administration of President Barack Obama as the Special Assistant for International Trade and Investment. Jake was involved in achieving President Obama's robust trade agenda, including 2 major negotiations, which we can learn about later. Responsible for attracting foreign direct investment into the US and helping US businesses operate internationally, Jake has traveled to over 25 countries, including extensive travel throughout China. His expertise in identifying key actors in foreign markets has been invaluable to GreenGeneration's operations. After this, Jake spent a year at Activision Blizzard in Santa Monica, California, reporting directly to the CEO, Bobby Kotick, where he was responsible for the initial round of team sales for the firm's Overwatch Pro League. Now, welcome to you both, big warm welcome, and let's start with the podcast. So, Brad, tell us, what inspired you to start GreenGeneration, and what's the story behind it?
Louisa, thanks, and good morning. So usually when I start to talk about GreenGen and the story, I go way back, really just to sort of set it up, because it really helps make the point. You know, I spent the first 20 years of my professional life in real estate private equity. As you mentioned, I started at JMB in Chicago, then spent a decade at Starwood Capital, founding the business both in Asia and Europe. And the reality is that prior to 2008, real estate broadly, private equity broadly, really only focused on top line. All the focus was on driving revenue. If you looked at an investment memo of that from that period, it was 98, 99% on the top line with a little bit of mention about expenses or margin. That fell apart in 2008 with the global financial crisis. And all of a sudden, as top lines were collapsing and bottom lines were deteriorating, many of us began to look at expenses, looking for any way to mitigate this collapse of our cash flow. What we found was quite interesting because, in fact, there was this big line item, energy, electric, water, gas, and steam, that was not only really big, but it turns out it was much more controllable than people had often thought. And so the ability to focus on reducing energy costs would in turn drive your cash flow and your asset values. But when we went to look for people to help us think about it, all we really found were a lot of consultants who essentially wanted to tell us what to do, but neither implement nor execute, or people that wanted to sell us their product. Buy my software, my window, my motor, my device. And we felt there was just a different approach. And as we spoke to friends at other real estate firms and other private equity firms, asking who owned this category of spend, who helped you think about lowering energy-related operating costs, it turns out that there really wasn't anybody focused on the investor class, the financial community, in this way. And so my wife and I, who had met at J&B Realty out of university, founded GreenGen in 2011. And from the beginning, our focus was to really drive a financial outcome relative to energy, but then have the co-benefits of sustainability and resiliency as a byproduct from this. In this way, we were able to articulate both a financial outcome, but an environmental or climate-driven outcome.
Tell us a little bit more about how are your sort of roles defined within those areas?
Well, so when we first started, we did one thing. We would assess an asset or a portfolio, we engineered the solution, and then we executed to get the outcome. The outcome was always a financial outcome. People quickly said, hey, if it makes sense when we already own it, then what about when we're buying it, financial due diligence, or when we're building it, design peer review? And then we just kept looking at different ways where there was an intersection of not only the energy piece, but the capital markets and real estate piece. That led us into creating a data analytics platform, which we use both as a measurement and verification tool for solutions. In other words, if you expect savings of, say, 100,000 pounds, to make certain that you got it and that you understand where it's coming from. We naturally, as an integrator, were always using and interacting with new technologies as we look to address different types of problems in the built environment. That led us into ventures. We recognize that another way to create return from our work was to look at the carbon reduction that we were making. That led us into offsets. And then finally, the recognition that despite the fact that our clients, some of the world's leading investors, own lots of assets, they don't own all the assets. And so when there are assets or opportunities that we can become a principal, essentially using our principal experience to invest and drive both a financial return, but also to sort of thinking about you integrating the energy expertise we have, we'll do that. And so, from some people on the outside, they look at these 5 different businesses as sort of detached. We actually think that they're quite integrated. And really, the fact that we have the solutions business with electrical, mechanical, lighting, and environmental engineers located around the world looking at technologies and buildings and problems and solutions, it has allowed us to find, frankly, simply different ways to monetize the expertise we have. And that's where our business sort of sits today.
Yeah. And I guess, Jake, to sort of bring you in on this, you're obviously very involved in the venture side of the business. I've got obviously 2 questions. What is it like to work with your parents? I don't know if I personally could do that. And tell us a little bit more how the ventures coincides to the other 4 areas as well and how you sort of built that out.
Yeah, I'll start by saying this. I consider myself extremely fortunate and lucky to be able to work with my parents. It's simplifying and complicating at the same time to have your parents also be your boss, but I think we're pretty good at it at this point. And I'm really enjoying it and happy that they hired me.
Thanks, Dad. And tell us more about the ventures business. You've played an integral part in sort of growing it. You've invested, I guess, looking at some of the businesses like Senseware, and you've looked at. I'd love to hear a little bit more about it.
Yeah. So the venture business really grew out of a kind of a conversation I think was over one of these holidays where we were talking as a family about how do we leverage this technological expertise and business experience? How do we leverage that into something that brings value, not just to investors and to companies, but to GreenGen as well? And prior to my joining and prior to the venture business as a whole, we were doing pilots and testing technologies just because that's built into the company's DNA. It's always been, about finding the best technologies, the most innovative solutions to deliver value for clients. What we were seeing was that we were identifying these companies because we were doing these real world pilots. And in many cases that provided a great service to potential investors. They got, a technical review, in many cases, engineering review, and to the companies that some of them didn't have real world data sets yet. And that can be an incredibly valuable, set of data. And what we saw was companies raising a lot of money, investors making a lot of money, and we were just doing the pilots. And so as we tried to discuss, how do we capture some of this value, we landed upon, let's continue to do what we do. We're not going to change anything that we do. We're going to continue pilots. And now if we identify what we find to be a promising technology or a winner, so to speak, then let's invest in it. Let's have a vehicle to take advantage of that work. And then my dad looked across the table. I was living in LA at the time. And he said, do you want to come home and run it? And you'll be surprised that I wasn't a huge fan of LA, and I was kind of, I was missing the East Coast, and I said yes. And I went back to Los Angeles after, and I think it might have been like 2 weeks later, I got a text message with, we're going to New York, meet me in New York. And I met my dad in New York in the airport, and he handed me business cards.
Wow.
Off to the races.
I love that. Straight to business. And I guess since then you've invested as how many companies? Is it something like 4 companies? It's Conservation Labs, Senseware, DataQuip, if I pronounce that right. What these businesses you invested in, what do you sort of look for?
Yeah, so there are 4 companies that we have invested in to date. You've just mentioned 3 of them. The 4th one is Wynd, WYND. And for us, each of them plays in a strategic, important area, especially right now. Senseware is a IoT platform and solution that essentially can take older buildings, and I hesitate to use the word dumb, but we use the word smart so much that I'll say older, not connected buildings, and very easily and manageable way to bring those systems and those buildings online. And then, it's a old smart building, and that's Senseware. Wynd is a air quality sensor and purifier company based in Silicon Valley that we're really excited about. And they are, that's that. They're very busy with air quality, especially right now. And then Conservation Labs is a company from Pittsburgh that is a water risk mitigation and water management system. It's kind of the first of its kind. It uses acoustics to listen to the flows of the water inside the pipes as a way of monitoring flow and identifying deviations from what it should sound like. And that's massive, quite frankly, unaddressed market, especially as it relates to insurance claims. Water incidents are increasing not just in frequency, but also in severity. And in many cases, the insurance companies are the ones left holding the bag. You never hear about someone having a small water leak or a small water damage. If it happens, it's large. And that can be extremely difficult for a commercial asset to survive, be resilient through. So we're really excited about Conservation Labs. And then the 4th is DataQuip, which is a company actually out of Maryland that provides an enterprise cloud-based energy analytics software that detects and helps reduce energy usage using the existing equipment in the building and no additional hardware. And it's pretty cool. During this pandemic, of course, there's been additional challenges that related to doing things like retrofitting and renovations. And actually with DataQuip, we were able to remotely install their software into a building and essentially bring the building online entirely remotely. So that DataQuip is another company that we are actively deploying both over in Asia and Europe as well.
That's impressive.
And Louisa, let me just add to that, because I think, the 4 companies that Jake just took us through, each one of them is addressing what we identified as a really big problem. And this is where we've had great sort of advantage, if you will. And our engineering team is assessing all manner of assets and asset types around the world. We're identifying the issues that the owners and the engineers are trying to address and looking for solutions for. And each of these companies was a result of not necessarily looking for investment, but rather looking for a solution to a problem we identified as big. In all cases, we work with these companies for some period of time, long before we considered even investing. In no case were these companies looking for money when we first met them. They were looking for clients. And so, rather than sort of taking an investment point of view, should we invest? We took the engineering perspective. Should we use this product? Should we use this technology? Is it better than alternatives? And that's what's really sort of exciting about how we've gone at this. And we end up with a lot of insights, essentially asymmetrical information about what these technologies can do, how do they work, and how effective are they, long before there's a financial question or an investment decision to be made.
And I guess, Jake mentioned how some of these businesses have launched, globally. Brad, you've grown GreenGen, I guess your whole team, to operate globally. Are there certain countries or whether it's regions where you've seen more of sort of an uptake in, looking for you to help them with a solution or, areas of sort of growth you've seen?
I'm not sure that I could tell you that there's one region more than another. What we're seeing right now, we're sort of the twin trends of capital markets, essentially investors telling real estate investment firms and private equity firms that they need to find ways to address ESG and sustainability in their operations and their investment process. And at the same time, investors simply recognizing that for a long period of time, there was a large category of spend, namely energy, that they simply were missing. They weren't really focused on. And so, we're deeply focused on reducing electric, water, gas, and steam. In recent years, we've done a lot of work around repairs and maintenance, a lot of work around insurance. Conservation Labs is primarily not addressing the use of water so much. It's not so much a water efficiency play, but it's much more focused on insurance tech and essentially the ability to reduce the cost of insurance or the claims associated with water leaks or taking the asset, offline. And so that's really how we looked at it. I will tell you this, that during the pandemic, we have seen an acceleration of our business in Asia. We've got numerous projects in Japan, Korea, China, Hong Kong right now. We're looking at some things down in Oceania imminently, but also in Europe. And if you go fast forward and look at all of the budgets, all the regulations, all the political discussion around how to recover, with the notable exception of the United States, you're seeing sustainability, you're seeing climate and the environment as an integral part of all the recovery plans. €2 trillion euros in the EU. Japan noting it's going to be carbon neutral by 2060, 2050 in Korea, China. What you're seeing across the board is people linking economic development and business and investment growth to the climate and the environment. And with those things happening, we are finding a demand for those who understand sort of the financial side of climate change and the financial side of upgrading assets in high demand.
I guess that sort of answers my next question about, how the pandemic has impacted your business. But if we're going a little bit more into this is quite a general question. I'm sure you get asked this a lot. What would you say? And though I doubt there's plenty of challenges, don't get me wrong. But what would you say maybe the biggest challenges in real estate today? Is it convincing the funds to sort of focus on it? It sounds like from what you just said, there seems to be more of an interest and uptake in looking at these solutions. But is there anything you could sort of pinpoint from what you've seen?
Well, I don't think there's a universal answer across all of real estate. As an example, in hospitality, people are questioning whether or not all hotels need to exist. And, what you saw is the vast majority of hotels closing. Now they're coming back online. But do we need as many hotels? Will business travel post-pandemic look the same as it did pre-pandemic? Office space. There's obviously lots of discussion and perhaps no more impacted an asset class than office because people are now getting used to working remotely. And so will we have the same demand for office space? Maybe fewer people. But at the same time, are the people going to need more space because we had really shrunk the number of square feet or square meters per employee to a much lower number? And with people traveling less, you've got lots of sort of assumptions and underlying ideas sort of working back and forth. But certainly, one of the biggest challenges we have right now in the short term is access, because we're seeing lots of rules changing all the time. And so we have a portfolio, for instance, in Europe right now of hotels. And we are trying to figure out, based on where our people are and where they reside and where the assets are, who can go where. And the rules that exist this week may not be the same rules as next week, as the number of cases rises and falls and governments change the rules to protect their citizens. And so that's a real challenge when you're trying to make, medium-term plans, to have all these very short-term changes.
Well, it's probably a good thing that you've got 5 different parts to your business, Brad and Jake. I guess it's fairly difficult to make sort of predictions sort of going forward about what sort of might happen. Is I guess it's also hard to measure, where are you seeing some of the most sort of success or sort of headway made across like each of the divisions of your business?
Well, I'll go back to something I said a moment ago. It is hard to know day to day how we're going to execute various parts of our business. It is not hard for us to sort of see what the overall trends of the business look like. The overall trends of the business are extremely positive. And we are seeing growth not only in all the businesses that we're in, but in all the places that we do what we do. So that, continues, really quite unabated. And, what we're finding is that we're helping people understand how the environment and climate is profitable. It's really simple. For a long period of time, people generally thought of climate or sustainability as a cost. Be more sustainable. What will that cost me? Even politicians and governments often do this. What we're simply doing is we're going one step further. And, there's the basic concept in business called cost benefit. It usually is that investors and governments stop at cost. We're simply helping to articulate very clearly the benefit. And that's both in terms of hard ROI and soft ROI. Hard ROI simply being either reducing expenses or increasing various revenues so that the cash flow improves, the asset value is driven. But there's also soft ROI. Health and safety is something that everyone thought was important prior to COVID, but no one really wanted to spend a lot of money on. People now want to spend money on health and safety. They want to spend, they'll spend money, and they like health, they like productivity, they like, reduced health insurance costs. Those are really hard things to quantify, but all we have to agree is that there's no negative value to those things. And if there's no negative value, then having these softer ROIs that come on top of the hard ROI are simply additive. And then, once you're doing this work, you have the ability to sort of baseline and measure and see if those returns came. And then you can start to find additional hard ROIs based on your data and your evidence that you can use to make future investment decisions.
And I guess, Jake, on your sort of side, are there any sort of products out there which you see sort of succeeding? Obviously, we sort of touched upon sort of air quality, obviously water, everything like that. Is there any, whether you can advise in this, I don't know, but, is there any areas which the real estate and private equity firms sort of really should be, maybe taking up or sort of using these products to differentiate themselves?
Yeah. So, yes. I think, for us, we, our main focus and I have to narrow my focus too is on the actual building envelope itself. However, that being said, I think that more as a sign of the times than anything, one of the things that is going to become increasingly important, if it isn't, already, is transparency. I think that for a long time, companies that were just, location. Now we are in a environment, and I think, it's going to continue in this direction of the experience is just as important. And people want to work at companies that reflect their values, whether it be social values or related to the environment and sustainability. And consequently, companies are going to be pushed to find office space and find real estate that satisfies their employees. In many ways, it's now become part of talent retention and acquisition. And so I all of that to say, I think the buildings that will succeed and maintain occupancy and lease out, especially, given everyone's, remoteness, is going to be those buildings that implement the steps now to mitigate their impact on the environment, and also communicate what they're doing, how it's doing in real time in terms of transparency, data transparency.
Yeah. And Louise, let me just add to that. What we're seeing is that the pandemic and COVID are creating costs that weren't anticipated pre-pandemic. Those costs include things like insurance. So we're seeing more claims relative to COVID and air quality. We're seeing costs for water go up because of the lack of investment in infrastructure. So more water leaks across the world. We're also seeing a trend which may be exacerbated and accelerated by the U.S. election, which is coming up shortly, around a price on carbon. And all these are things that are imposing additional costs on businesses and real estate assets. The minute a cost is imposed is the minute we have the ability to use technology and best practices to mitigate that cost and drive the value. So let me give you an example. We've seen increasingly, an interest in health and safety, but what's really driving this now is the risk of insurance claims or other claims against a business and asset, senior living, for instance. How do you measure and how do you give people comfort that the air quality is good? And so once that's in place, that both potentially impacts occupancy. People don't want to be in a building or don't want to have their parents somewhere where they can't be certain of the safety, but also the potential legal claims. And so now the ability to filter the air better in terms of air flows, in terms of air quality, but also the potential and the necessity of presenting data and quantifying what does healthy air mean is now something that can be quantified. You can link it to a financial outcome. And those are the types of things that we're really focused on. We probably, we think about a product ultimately as simply manifesting an investment theme. The more important thing for us right now is sort of thinking about the investment themes. And that continues to be the Internet of Things, controls and sensors in the built environment that will turn things on and off and regulate them, air quality, insurance tech.
And I guess it covers almost sort of everything. I know even as a sort of tenant, I'm looking at different things which our landlord can incorporate in it, especially during everything that's happening at the moment. I guess this aside, because I'm conscious that we're coming nearly to the end of the podcast, and I wanna hear a little bit more from both of you about, I guess, your journeys as well to where we are now. Jake, question, what was it like working in the administration of President Barack Obama, special assistant? That's pretty impressive. And what was it like sort of moving over to obviously Green Generation? Very different roles. It's fascinating.
Yeah, very different, to say the least. I was incredibly fortunate to be able to serve under President Obama after college, especially at, such a interesting and impactful time as it relates to the trade, international trade regime. I think it was 2017 that the Financial Times called it the year of trade, and they weren't kidding. We were super busy. But, I think what I got, from that experience, as you mentioned, I got to visit, 27 different countries, China 19 times.
Wow.
And yeah, it's a lot. Yeah. And got to work on, two, rather, large and impactful trade agreements. One of which had me in Brussels quite often was what we called Safe Harbor, which ended up being GDPR, and Safe Harbor data trade agreement that came out of the Snowden fallout. And, it gave me an incredible worldview. I got to learn about specific issues in each corner of the world. And, it was an incredible experience. And then the election cycle begins and people start to leave, and, governments say, let's pick this back up after the election, because they know that no matter who wins the election, it won't be Barack Obama. So, there's kind of a lame duck internationally as well. So at that point, I just was out to figure out what I wanted to do next. And ended up in LA and got to work on another, space esports that was, very different as well, kind of adding different tools to my toolkit, so to speak. And in many ways, that ended up being similarly an international type of job because of where it's a city-based league and it was a worldwide. So I got to use some of that experience and network to do that. And, how does that fit back with GreenGen? And it's another thing at the beginning that was relatively unique and new. But, I think that given the experiences I've had, it's been able to, provide a good bellwether and guide me in how we operate, because we are a global firm and our search for technologies is not limited to any one geography. So, utilizing and leveraging that network of people I've met from all over the world, as well as, the different startup ecosystems and technology ecosystems that I became familiar with, has been kind of invaluable, I think.
Yeah. No, I bet. And talking of different geographies, Brad, you've obviously done your stint in the UK. Tell us a little bit about, your time in Bristol and I guess how it's impacted, a little bit of your life and business now.
Bristol. Louisa, thanks for that.
Beautiful Bristol.
Yeah. Bristol is a beautiful city. So as you know, when I was younger, I was a footballer, English football in the U.S., and was fortunate when I was 18 to have the opportunity to come and join Bristol Rovers in 1980. And it was really quite an extraordinary experience. I had a university acceptance at Harvard, so I had sort of a, what I'll call a world-class plan B. And I came over in August of that year. And it was quite an interesting year. The first week of the season, our stadium burned down. We ended up sharing with Bristol City for the entire season because our stadium wasn't available. And it really went downhill from there. And ultimately, fast forward to the spring, we ended up getting relegated from what was then the second to the third. And the experience of relegation, if you haven't gone through it either as a diehard fan or as a member of an organization or a player, there is nothing comparable in the United States experience. In the U.S., if you don't win, at the bottom, you're basically the worst team gets a draft choice, and there's actually a prize for being the worst team. There is no prize for being at the bottom of a league table in the UK. But I think there are sort of two outtakes. One, despite the fact that we were relegated, there was a tremendous amount of young talent on this team. My manager at the time was Terry Cooper, who had come from Leeds and was one of the leading wing backs for England and Leeds back in the day. But at the same time, Gary Mabbutt was a 21-year-old winger who went on to skipper Tottenham to the FA Cup. Keith Curl, who ended up as a skipper at Man City, was on the team. Ian Holloway, who had a long career and ended up as the manager of Blackpool. There was some tremendous talent. And as a goalkeeper, I think that the most important thing is the goalkeeper, if you're a really good goalkeeper, in many respects, you have to make very few saves, because what you end up doing is you end up positioning all the rest of the talent on the field in the right place, making your job very easy. And as a CEO, it's no different. My job is to basically help get the best talent on the field and put them in the right positions to succeed. And when you do that, you have both, as a goalkeeper, you have the best view of the pitch because you're really, looking out across everything. But you also have the easiest job because everything is done prior to it getting to you. You end up only having to clean things up, and everybody else does the hard work for you.
I didn't think I'd hear all these comparisons between obviously Tottenham and sort of what you're doing now. I completely understand now. Also quite the sort of journey. Guys, this has been an absolutely terrific sort of podcast, and we're going to have to come to an end of it. But I'm sure there's a bit of parting advice and you could give some of the listeners, and also the best way for them to connect with both of you and Green Generation. Yeah,
so it's really easy. We're not hiding. The website is greengen.com, GreenGen.com. And then, just my first name and my last name, Brad, BRAD, Dockser, DOCKSER. Easy to find on LinkedIn, easy to find on Twitter. I would encourage people to follow us on LinkedIn. We are, robust in terms of both white papers and research, but also as an aggregator of lots of research from the industry. I sit on the global board for the Urban Land Institute's global board for sustainability and technology. And so, those are all good ways to sort of find and follow what we're doing, but also see what's going on across the industry, because there is so much at this intersection of real estate, capital markets, technology, and energy. And from our point of view, there's no more exciting place to be for the next decade anywhere in the world than where we are right now.
Yeah, I second that. And Jake,
yes,
any way people can connect with you as well?
LinkedIn, email jake@greengen.com. You can find. You can find me.
Well, look, and thank you both for coming on the Propcast. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I'm looking forward to catching up with you after the show.
Thank you.
Louisa, thank you very much.
Thank you for joining us this week on the Propcast, and a big thanks to our special guests. Make sure you visit our website, www.lmre.co.uk, where you can subscribe to our show, or you'll find us on iTunes and Spotify, where all good content is found. Whilst you're at it, if you found value in the show, we'd appreciate if you could rate and review us on iTunes, or if you simply just spread the word. Be sure to tune in next Tuesday, and I'll catch you later.
You're listening to a Podcast Company podcast. This was made by Podcast Syndicator, where we help you go from start to grow to making money with your podcast. Let us help you share your message and your voice with the world. Reach out now, Jason at podcastsyndicator.com or Brett at podcastsyndicator.com to find out more. Thank you for listening, and do come back to hear nothing but the best podcasts.